So as Pastor Bessie said, during the season of Lent, we're gathering at homes on Sunday evenings for dinner. I hope that you'll take part in one. I was at one last week, and it was just the most wonderful time. So please do RSVP through the newsletter. We're sharing a meal, Bible study, and communion. We're calling it Meeting Jesus at the Table. Although, if it were up to the Gospel of John, we might have to call it Meeting Jesus at the Wash Basin. Unlike Matthew, Mark, and Luke, in John, Jesus doesn't formally institute that meal that we call the Lord's Supper, where Jesus takes the bread and the wine of the Passover meal and says of the bread, "This is my body," and says of the wine, "This is my blood, the cup of the new covenant. Do this in remembrance of me." For sure, in John, there are allusions to the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, but John, as we've been saying, does things in John's own way. And in the fourth gospel, on that very same night of Jesus' betrayal, Jesus rises from his last meal, and he washes the disciples' feet. And he commands them to do the same. I don't know about you, but I would guess that if we did some Meeting Jesus at the wash basin dinners, with Bible study and foot washing during dinner, we wouldn't get as many takers. At this meal in John chapter 13, Jesus is well into a downward spiral. In response to his raising of Lazarus from the dead, which we listened to last week, in response to that, some have hatched a plot to kill Jesus. We're told that right there at Jesus' last meal is a betrayer. Within hours, Jesus will be arrested, accused, tried, and sentenced to a death of pain and humiliation. Jesus eats with his disciples, well aware that all of this is coming. As John says, Jesus knew his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. And precisely because of what's coming, Jesus gets up from supper, removes his outer robe, ties a towel around himself, pours water into a basin, and begins to wash the disciples' feet and dry them with a towel. This was a loud record scratch compared to what was supposed to play out in that meal. Not least of which is that in Jesus' culture, there was foot washing, but the foot washing happened before the meal. And if you entered someone's home to receive foot washing, the host never washed anyone's feet. That was reserved for the servants or the enslaved. And if you're going to wash someone's feet, you don't get up from the table in the middle of the meal to do it. To Peter, this record scratch on the meal is just beneath Jesus. He protests, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus knows that Peter can't understand, and so he has all kinds of compassion on us for the ways that in our hearts and in our minds, we just show we don't understand either. That in washing feet, Jesus is showing what true glory looks like. He's revealing God to us. He's calling us to life like the God in whose image we're made. Thus he says, "I have set you an example that you should do as I have done to you." And so across all kinds of times and places in church history, Christians have practiced ritual foot washing. A lot of the time it's on Maundy, Thursday, and the church that I served back in Kansas City did this sort of thing one Maundy, Thursday. Our worship leaders were putting together Holy Week worship and decided this year, let's practice foot washing. And so my pastoral colleague and I got to work crafting a liturgy and putting some plants out there, preparing the congregation ahead of time, asking session members to come. Please lead the way, because this is a little weird, maybe a little different for Presbyterian. So please, session members, if you would come and be the plants in the congregation to wash the feet and to have your feet washed. And we thought we were all ready to go for this foot washing Maundy, Thursday service, until we realized at the last minute that we did not think about what to use as the basins. I think it's partly because we were young, we were long on theological education and short on practical wisdom. And then we had an idea. Those big salad bowls in the church kitchen would work great. Our PWU members know where this is going. And so we have the service, and it comes time for that poignant moment when we wash each other's feet. And one of the matriarchs of the church, the matriarch of the church kitchen, even from her seat, 3/4 of the way back in the sanctuary, recognized the salad bowls. She did not come forward for foot washing. But I can tell you, she stayed after worship and gave us an earful. A few days later, the church kitchen had new salad bowls. In the manner of the love that it models, foot washing is tender and profound in concept, but in practice is vulnerable, maybe offensive to sensibilities, even humiliating, and perhaps kind of icky. In my office here at the church, I have a Japanese watercolor painting of Jesus washing a disciple's feet, and it kind of looks like he's scrubbing between the disciples' toes. It's left to the viewer to imagine which of the disciples' feet Jesus is washing. When I look at it, sometimes I like to imagine that it's Judas, the betrayer. This foot washing act is what Jesus wants seared in his disciples' memories as he goes to the cross, because it says everything about God and about what's coming next. For John says that Jesus washes the disciples' feet and tells them to do likewise, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going to God. That is, he washes feet precisely because he has received the fullness of God's power. With a foot in one hand and a towel in the other, Jesus is showing the completeness of God's character. In his glory as the Son who has come from the Father and will return to the Father, Jesus kneels and washes feet. Jesus, the foot-washing Savior, shows us who God is and what God does. As Jesus prepares to receive the full brunt of our inhumanity on the cross, all our inhumane violence and the way we demonize and dehumanize and scapegoat and seek self-advancement and self-preservation over love. As Jesus prepares for all of that, he reveals the form that divine power truly takes. In the face of sin and evil, with all the options God has before God to do all kinds of violence in the world. Jesus washes feet because that is the ultimate expression of God's power. If we want to see what power looks like in the world, according to God's kingdom, if we as Christians want our heads straight about what real power looks like, we need to look at Jesus offering humble service. And Jesus looks at us disciples, and says, you also ought to wash one another's feet. Because after all, we are made in God's image, and this is the life that we're really meant for. Remember back in John chapter 1 where we hear that through Jesus we receive power to become children of God. Well, as with God, so with the children. Rowan Williams says that a mark that we're growing up as God's children, that we're becoming transformed into Christ likeness through our relationship with Christ. It's that we're becoming more attentive to the needs of those around us. We're becoming, in his words, unfussed about our own status and liberated from longing to save and solve everything by our own wisdom and heroism. And so growing up as followers of Jesus means coming to see that there are foot basins placed before us all across our day. There's a basin before the feet of the restaurant server who flubbed the order. There's a bowl at the feet of the coworker who really rubs us the wrong way. The whole reason we're serving with Riverview International Center, the RIC, is because God has placed wash basins for us right there at the feet of our immigrant neighbors. The question might be, before whom is God not placing basins of water and calling us to kneel right there alongside Jesus? Because Jesus is there already. He's the Savior with calloused knees, who reveals that growing up as God's children is about learning to love feet. It's as priest and poet Malcolm Gita writes in a poem for Maundy Thursday. And here he shows the full extent of love to those whose love is always incomplete. In vain we search the heavens high above. The God of love is kneeling at our feet. But we should know, this call to live as foot-washing people comes with the most beautiful promise. As we live into the humble power of Jesus, with all the challenge that entails and all the resistance our egos might throw up, there is God caring for us lovingly, tenderly, the creator of the universe washing between our toes. Thanks be to God.